Hi, I'm Dave Kale. Welcome to this Christian Business Insights podcast show where my goal is to provide you with practical, actionable ideas to help you create businesses and careers of excellence and at the same time multiply your influence for the kingdom. I have been a Christian in business for over 30 years, and I have personally and contractually consulted with over 500 different sales organizations. So in these podcasts, I combine the lessons that I have learned with an out-of-the-box experience and perspective on Christianity that you will find challenging. And we put that together to provide you with practical insights and ideas that you can use to live better and lead better. Welcome to the journey. Hi, this is Dave. What do you think is the biggest threat to the success of your business these days? What do you think it is? Well, we're going to look at what I believe to be the biggest threat to your success as a business person today. We're going to look at that today. Recently, one of the members of my CBIG group suggested that I make a list of the 20 most important things I've learned in my 30 years of experience working with B2B sales organizations. And after a while, I thought, okay, I'll do that. So I created a list, and I discovered it to be longer than 20. So to narrow down the list, I applied these 4 criteria. Number 1, it had to be an important lesson, one which had the potential to dramatically impact a person, a sales team, or a business. It could not be superficial or trivial. That's 1. Number 2, had to arise out of my personal experience. In other words, not something that I garnered from a book or borrowed from someone else, something I've learned in the trenches. That's number 2. Number 3, it had to have been tested in the cauldron of real-world experience. No blue sky stuff here. And number 4, I had to unwaveringly vouch for its validity. These are concepts and lessons that I would stand behind. So applying those 4 criteria, I narrowed the list down to 25. And in no particular order, here's one of them. You ready for this? Rapid change is the greatest threat to our businesses and careers. Rapid change. Now, most leaders understand that the world is changing rapidly. The actual details are even more terrifying than that which we intuitively sense. Our generation is facing change to such a degree that it's unprecedented in the history of mankind. Of course, individuals and small groups of people have lived through mind-boggling change. Time of war, natural disasters, for example, have uprooted groups and transported them to a condition light years away from where they started. But these changes have typically been the consequences of an event. After the event passes, the folks settle into a new situation. Today, however, the changes are pervasive, systematic, and continuous. Let me illustrate. The root cause of our changing situation is the increase in information. As information expands, it seeps into every area of our economy and culture, and it causes change. So to measure change, we can track the growth of information. Now, there is a measurement called, quote, the total amount of information available to mankind. It is estimated that in the year 1900, the total amount of information was doubling every 500 years. That meant that the world was changing relatively slowly. Our great-grandparents, for example, probably lived in the same kind of houses their parents did, worked in the same kind of jobs, interacted with the same kinds of social structures. That was in the year 1900. Now fast forward to the year 2000. The total amount of information available to mankind was doubling every 2 years. Imagine the growth and the pace of change. We went from it doubling every 500 years to it doubling every 2 years. As a result, the world of the year 2000 was changing much more rapidly than the world in 1900. But what about now? Estimates indicate that the total amount of information doubles about every 30 days, and I think that's probably obsolete, probably faster than that. Is it any wonder that we feel like the ground that we're standing on is shaking? We're overwhelmed and confused. Richard Swenson, writing in his book Margin, had this observation to share, and I'm going to quote Richard Swenson, the book Margin, quote, the spontaneous tendency of our culture is to inexorably add detail to our lives. One more option, one more problem, one more commitment, one more expectation, one more purchase, one more debt, one more change, one more job, one more decision. We must now deal with more things per person than at any other time in history. You know what's interesting about that? Margin, the book Margin, was published, when do you think? The year 2000. Wow. If we had more things per person in the year 2000, what is it like today? So, you can't help but conclude there's never been a generation of business people who've had to deal with the pace of change moving as rapidly as our generation. It truly is unprecedented. And there are consequences. Look around us and we see products that have become obsolete almost overnight. Hey, remember the iPod? And companies come and go. I think Howard Johnson's. And, there's a whole list of those. Disruptive technologies upend entire industries in the blink of an eye. You want to invest in taxi companies these days? Well, the whole industry upended. And now the emergence of AI portends to usher in a world dramatically different than it was just a few months ago. While we can and do react to specific instances of change that impact us, few of us recognize that the pace of change itself is the greatest threat. We can, for example, respond to a new competitive product, but more important than the specific instance of change, we need to recognize that the pace of change will bring ever more competitive products. Today's instance is just today's instance. It's like a piece of driftwood being swept along in an ocean current. We can see and respond to the driftwood, but the underlying current is far more extensive and powerful. That powerful current threatens to upend our jobs, transform our industries, and warp our culture. The rapidly increasing pace of change is the single biggest threat our businesses and our careers and our personal lives. That is it. It's the biggest single threat we will face for the balance of our lives. If we don't effectively manage change, we risk our organization and our lives from being upended and rendered obsolete before we can respond. There was a time when an organization prided itself on being quick reacting. Today, if you wait to react, you are probably already behind the curve. Leaders today need to build disciplines and processes in their organization that proactively identify the next thing before it hits. Unprecedented change calls for new thinking. And I have thought deeply about this, and I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of podcasts and blog posts on what we need to do. What is our approach to dealing with this biggest threat? But for now, one of the 25 most important lessons I've learned is the pace of change itself, just the pace of change, is the biggest single threat to our businesses and our livelihood, our careers. Okay? That's it. Hey, we're done for now. Bye-bye.